I'm talking about our honorable speakers and probably around 5:30 in the United Arab Emirates. Great welcome from all of us here, Gandhi, Smriti and Darshan Samiti, and we are organizing this program with the UNESCO Media and Information Literacy University Network of India. This is a very prestigious program, the countering hate speech online, and in the context of how we can counter the hate speech online using the very important tool of non-violent communication. That's really important in today's world because last year the Secretary General of the United Nations had actually launched an action plan and strategy to counter hate speech. Also, it is so important to see that we have been celebrating the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, and Mahatma Gandhi has been a great proponent of non-violent communication. So, how we use the tools of non-violent communication to promote intercultural dialogue, interreligious dialogue, dialogue between different communities to counter the effects and of hate speech. This is going to be the theme for today's program, and we have very esteemed speakers with us, and we are really honored to have all these speakers and our chairperson. Before introducing all the esteemed speakers and the chairperson for this very important e-conference, let me tell you, Gandhi, Smriti and Darshan Samiti is actually a historical place, it is the national memorial of Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi Smriti, may I request Pankaj to kindly show, because Gandhi Smriti is the place where the apostle of peace, Mahatma Gandhi, was assassinated on 30th January 1948. It is an autonomous body under the Ministry of Culture, Government of India, and the Honorable Prime Minister of India is the chairperson of Gandhi Smriti Darshan Samiti. And the overarching goal of our organization is to promote the life and message of the Apostle of Peace. So we have been conducting workshops and training programs, different programs, interventions to promote the idea of the Apostle of Peace, Mahatma Gandhi. These images, this is the place exactly for all the honorable participants, the place where the Mahatma was shot, and this is the room which the Mahatma stayed the last 144 days of his life. So this is, in short, these are some of the galleries and the worldly remains of the Mahatma, the specs and all that are there, and this is the whole museum of Gandhi Smriti. I thought it would be, because it's a historical place, it would be very apt to share with our respected participants this whole thing of Gandhi Smriti there, here in New Delhi. And this is the beautiful sculpture where the Mahatma and the two, this boy and this girl, which actually encompasses the whole idea of peace. So, esteemed participants, now may I introduce to you our respected speakers for the day, along with our chairperson. Our speakers for the day are Dr. Alton Griesel, who, in fact, the best part of this whole program is that we have all been a family, all our esteemed speakers between me and Professor Jagtar Singh ji. So it is such a good thing to come together in this very much webinar. It's like a family that you feel like. It's really wonderful feeling here, personally. And for the esteemed participants, I'm Veda Vyas, and I work with Gandhi Smriti and Darshan Samiti. I'm the program officer. So Dr. Alton Griesel is the program specialist in UNESCO, and in fact, he handles the media and media information and information literacy program of the UNESCO, and he is a program specialist in communication and information. He has been taking the lead in promoting the whole ideas and various interventions of UNESCO in media and information literacy, and has been conceptualizing different books, different articles, different initiatives, publications of the UNESCO on media and information literacy. So, Alton, it is a great honor that you have joined us, and we are really very much we really appreciate that you spent took some time of your busy schedule to join us. We have Dr. Maha Bashri, who is an associate professor of communication at the United Arab Emirates University. She has also been part of the UNESCO's GAPNIL program on media and information literacy, and her research has been focusing on media representations of minority women, online mobilization, and use of the digital media in non-Western context. We have with us Mr. Bram Han Haber, who is the education specialist, and also he is into the looking after the very, very important aspect of the United Nations Alliance of Civilization. In fact, for participants who may not be aware possibly that UNESCO and the UN Alliance of Civilization have been bringing out this yearly yearbook on media and information literacy. So he has been leading the education pillar of the United Nations Alliance of Civilization based in New York, and it is basically to fulfill the mandate of the organization to build bridges between cultures and religions and prevent violent extremism. So this is something very, very important initiative. We have with us our dear friend, Dr. Sarah Gabai. Sarah is the communication key expert of the European Union funded Switch Asia programs, and actually also she's doing her PhD at the Mahidol University, the Institute of Human Rights and Peace Studies. Most importantly, also she has been co-founder of the TIMLE, that is the Digital International Media Literacy e-books. In fact, I remember being part of this initiative, and she, in the context of the keys to media literacy, that e-books that we have been developing in the context of India, we brought out, and that book was published in with Professor Art Silverblatt, one of the very leading professors of media education globally. So, welcome, Sarah, to this whole very important webinar e-conference that we have. We have Dr. Matthew Johnson. He's the Director of Education in Media Smarts Canada, and he has been a leading person looking after digital literacy. He's the author of many of the Media Smarts lessons, parent materials, and interactive resources, and a lead of Media Smarts there. So he is the architect of Media Smarts Use, Understand, Create Digital Literacy Framework for Canadian K-12 schools. Welcome, Matthew, to this e-conference. Most importantly, the person behind this whole, bringing all of us together, the guiding figure behind all of us is Professor Jagpal Singh Ji, who is the chair of this important e-conference, and he and his university has been working with Gandhi, Smriti and Darshan Samiti for several programs, and Professor Jagpal Singh Ji has been the former head of the Department of Library and Information Sciences and the former dean of the Faculty of Education and Information Sciences of Punjabi University, Patiala. He has been a very, very important and leading person on promoting media and information literacy and the network of the Media and Information Literacy University Network of India. And I have had a close opportunity to work with him for several initiatives related to media and information literacy and intercultural dialogue. So it has been a great, you really feel always as usual that to work with you, it is always a pleasure to work with you, and always we learn a lot from you. Thank you very much for guiding the spirit and bringing all of us together to this very, very important platform. Before we start all these, we have something very important for all the speakers. I would request our director, Mr. Dipankar Shrigyan, who is a administrative officer from Jharkhand Administrative Service, and she has been a very dynamic person who has been pushing all of us to do all these very, very innovative and creative programs, and given, you can say, whole way leverage to actually experiment with new ideas, experiment with new things. So I would request our director, Mr. Dipankar Shrigyan, to kindly formally give the welcome address for all the honorable speakers and the chairperson and the participants. Sir.
Namaskar, a very warm welcome on behalf of Gandhi Smriti to all of you. I'm really delighted to have Dr. Jagtar Singh with us. He's like a patron, like a guardian, like a person who always supports in our program. And we have conducted so many programs with his help, cooperation, and active support. All the esteemed guests from different parts of the world and representing the UN agencies. I think in today's world, the hate has become more prominent than the communication. Once we start communicating with others and we don't agree on the communication, we just start making hate and putting our words, which are hateful words, which are really teaching words, and which are really not promoting the non-violence. And finally, it leads to a verbal violence, a violence, or sometimes a physical violence. Throughout the world, the tendency to be more intolerant towards others' point of view has grown up, and we as a citizen have developed a tendency not to agree with others. And when we are not agreeing with others, we start trolling him, we start putting hate words for him, and we start just drilling for her. So the non-violent communication has a bigger role to curb all these things across the boundary of countries. And non-violent communication can only save the humanity, save the dignity of a mankind. And it is you people who are really making effort in all these fields so that the non-violent environment and ecosystem of the world is maintained. I am sure that this webinar will enrich all the participants how to react and how to behave in public life, and why the non-violent communication are more powerful to put up your point before others instead of putting a violent words or violent activity just to press your point. Your experience are such a vast in this field that the participant must gain something from you. And if they take away even a little from you, I'm sure that the whole behavior, whole temperament, and whole ecosystem of the world will change. Thanks for joining us in this webinar. And I thank you, all the participants, for showing their interest in this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. In fact, the tradition here in Gandhi Smriti has been that whenever we have any of these programs, we have a special felicitation of the esteemed speakers from the director. But here in this age of COVID-19, when we are all meeting in the digital world, we thought we will come up with something to felicitate our esteemed speakers in some way or the other. We decided that we would share with all our esteemed speakers. We have developed, you see, Mahatma Gandhi was one of the most prolific writers. One of his very important books has been Mahatma Gandhi's constructive programs. So we have developed a talking book out of that book of Mahatma Gandhi. And we would like to felicitate all our esteemed speakers with the talking book of Mahatma Gandhi's constructive work. And may I request Pankaj to share the cover page of the constructive work. And while we are speaking, one of our colleagues would have mailed all the esteemed speakers and our chairperson the link of the talking book. In fact, this talking book was developed by a little girl, and she has recorded it. And this is, in fact, this talking book has been sent to different countries across the world, especially to different, UN peacekeeping operations in many of the African countries where the Indian peacekeeping forces have been stationed. So it was distributed to various countries where the UN peacekeeping forces had been there. So this is very interesting talking book, and this is the way we are trying to felicitate all our speakers. And you will find this already in your mailbox, the link to this a very important book of Mahatma Gandhi. Thank you very much. And as now we start this whole program with our esteemed speakers, at the start of when we were discussing the whole modalities of how we go about and what we do, I was suggested by our close friend Sarah that many of the participants may not know much about what exactly is nonviolent communication, because we would also request at the end of the last 20 minutes, we would request some critical questions for our esteemed speakers. So in that context, I will share with you in 2 slides what exactly is nonviolent communication, so that it is for the participants, so that they have a grasp of what the speakers are going to talk about and probably frame those questions in their mind. For any person who wants to share any questions, kindly share in the chat box, so that when we end the whole session, we have the question answers. Also, for all of you, the format of this particular e-conference would be that we have 5 esteemed speakers, and we have 4 sets of questions for the esteemed speakers. And what we will do is we start with the first 2 sets of questions, and each of the esteemed of speakers would be giving their perspectives on those 2 questions to start with. And then in the next round, another set of 2 questions, which will again, they will give their views on that, followed by a few questions from either our honorable chairperson or myself on the critical points which our honorable respected esteemed speakers might have shared in their presentations. This is like some kind of just a suggestive thing. Also, each of the esteemed speakers have the right to, they could focus on a particular question for a major focus on that instead of the other question that is again left to the esteemed speakers. Also, for the first round, 5 minutes, second 5, and the third round 5. But as I said, it will be a very flexible kind of a situation where an esteemed speaker might like to focus more on a particular set of questions than on the other. It completely lies completely at the freedom of the speaker. Also, for your information, one of our speakers, I was told from the passing that Mr. Bram Van Haver probably might have leave the program for another assignment after 1 hour. So we will try to work on that, being flexible on that issue. We start with first presentation on what exactly is nonviolent communication before we start the round of questions. Here it is. Let me start with this beautiful quote, which is the essence of nonviolent communication, and which is also the essence of how to counter hate. Mahatma Gandhi says, let us be clear regarding the language we use and the we nurture. For what is language but the expression of thought? Let thought be accurate and truthful, and you will hasten the advent of Swaraj, even if the whole world is against you. Mahatma Gandhi. Now we exactly see what exactly is the definition. You can say, I will not explain anything on that. Just read out what is the definition of nonviolent communication. Mr. Pankaj, the next slide, please. Yeah, we have senior Gandhian. This definition was given by a very, very senior Gandhian, Mr. Nakpat Thakkar, and he has done a lot of work on emotional bridge building in India. And this is his definition of non-violent communication. He says, in fact, he says that the world we are living in at this stage, and
आप जिस व्यक्ति से बात कर रहे हैं उन्होंने आपके कॉल को होल्ड पर रखा है कृपया लाइन पर बने रहिए The person you are speaking with has put your call on hold. Please stay on the line. आप जिस व्यक्ति से बात कर रहे हैं उन्होंने आपके कॉल को होल्ड पर रखा है कृपया लाइन पर बने रहिए The person you are speaking with has put your call on hold. Please stay on the line. आप जिस व्यक्ति से बात कर रहे हैं उन्होंने आपके कॉल को होल्ड पर रखा है कृपया लाइन पर बने रहिए The
Pankaj,
person
I
you are
think there is a
speaking with
problem. Someone
has put your call on hold.
muted my call.
Please stay on.
Pankaj,
Sir,
yeah, someone seems to be muted my call or something. Hello.
we will just request all the participants please to put their microphone on mute mode. Only the speaker should have his microphone on. Otherwise, there will be
Yeah,
a lot of disturbance.
everybody kindly mute their microphone on so that it is easier for the speakers to deal with, because otherwise we'll face a lot of problems. Yeah, thank you. So according to Mr. Natpat Thakkar, he says he talks about the need to promote non-violent communication literacy. He wants to link non-violent communication. We need to be non-violent communication literate. That's what he stresses upon. He says, to me, non-violent communication literacy would mean that our communication efforts should be non-violent in nature, how our ability and capacity to communicate not only with ourselves, but with our family and our society be non-violent in all aspects and cover all, and how the entire process of communication, whether between individuals, groups, communities, and the world at large, should be non-violent in nature. Next slide, please. He says, for this should entail a deep understanding of the art and science of nonviolence and its centrality in all our daily actions. It's not just verbal and non-verbal communication. Non-violent communication literacy should also include whether our thoughts and ideas are non-violent or not. Next slide, please. Yeah, I will just go through quickly the elements of non-violent communication so that it will be easier for us to remember when we connect with the whole idea of hate speech. Non-violent communication means complete lack of violence in the way we communicate with others and ourselves. Use of appropriate and positive language and expand our emotional vocabulary. The third point is how we should avoid stereotypes in our communication efforts. The fourth is how we avoid moralistic judgments. Next slide, please. Avoid being aggressive. How we should avoid being aggressive. The next element of non-violent communication is the power of empathy in our communication efforts. The next is power of compassion. The next is connecting with needs of others. Then importance of flexibility in our communication, the openness in our communication process. The second last important point is the importance of listening skills. Listen with empathy and compassion. And the last important element of nonviolent communication is expressing gratitude. So these are some of the elements of nonviolent communication, and we would love to listen to our esteemed speakers on those important lines and connecting with the importance of, how to counter online hate speeches. So we come to the first two questions in the round one, and the first question, as I said, we will look at these two questions first, and then we look at the last two questions. So I will just read out, it is there in your screen. The first question comes in. While the 21st century public sphere is driven by destructive technological environment, we find large number of instances when vested interest groups fuels intolerance and hatred in the digital world. The United Nations has come up with the strategy and plan of action to counter hate speech. How can governments and civil societies across the world work together to realize the goals of the plan of action? This is the first question. And the second question is, Senior Gandhian Natwar Thakkar, remember, I read out his explanation of nonviolent communication. He has articulated on the challenges to those who are involved in the construction of communication messages. He says, the need for communicators today is to challenge the attempts to divide people on the basis of class, religion, and race. So right from a young age, we need to teach children to use communication to promote human values, which contributes to a spirit of solidarity. The communication education, to my mind, should integrate the values of pluralism, mutual respect, and inclusivity. It should not be a vehicle to sensationalize or incite passion, but a lesson to practice self-restraint and principles of non-violence in all aspects. In this context, how can nation states and educational institutions across the world join together to encourage communication education, which encourages pluralism, mutual respect, understanding, empathy, and inclusivity, the bedrock of nonviolent communication? Also, what specific pedagogical tool needs to be promoted in this regard, both at school and university level, so that people take the lead in building bridges between cultures and religions to counter hate speech and prevent violent extremism? These are the first two questions. And without wasting any time, may I request our first speaker, Dr. Alton Drizzle, to kindly share his views on these aspects. Alton.
Thank you so much, Professor Kendu. It's really a pleasure to be joining this dialogue. Let me first thank Professor Jagtar Singh and all his colleagues for inviting UNESCO to this conclave. UNESCO is pleased to be among such diverse group of actors and professors, and engaging with our friends and partners who are connected on WebEx and Facebook Live. It's really a family gathering, as Professor Kendu indicated earlier. I see many of our stakeholders or partners that are on this panel, esteemed professors and speakers, but also among the audience. We see quite a number of our partners from all over the world. I don't want to start naming some of those who we're seeing, but welcome, and we're glad to be continuing this movement for peace through nonviolent communication, which is wrapped up in the context of media and information literacy. Let me say again that I'm very excited to be a part of this meeting of minds. And I'm excited and moved and humbled for two reasons. The first is professional. Nonviolent communication and anti-hate speech is the raison d'etre of UNESCO, and indeed the entire United Nations. My colleague is here with me today, Bram. The second reason is personal. Why I'm excited, humbled to be a part of this meeting of minds, this dialogue. Second reason is personal. And that personal reason is that I've lived and experienced the power of nonviolent communication. Having been born and grown in the inner cities of downtown Kingston, Jamaica, I've lived and come face to face with poverty, rife with illegal guns, drugs, gang violence, warfare, political tribalism, the prisons, and I can continue. But I also lived and experienced how words and communication and information can be more powerful than guns and gangs and violence and the like. With the hope for restorative justice, peace, and transformation. This is nonviolent communication, as was indicated by Professor earlier. This is nonviolent communication in action. My experience living in violent communities with daily conflict and sometimes getting wrapped up in that conflict is that those who pursued nonviolent communication often, more often than not, triumphed over the miry poverty stained with violence and hate and revenge. The paradox and the contradiction that mark two of the greatest promoters of nonviolence. We have heard much about Mahatma Gandhi and also Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The paradox and contradiction that mark these two great eras of the world and champions of nonviolence cannot escape the lens of the discussion that we're having today. They did not only promote nonviolent communication, but they were the epitome of lived nonviolence. Yet, sadly, both died at the hand of violence, which led to mass violence and sectarian conflicts after their deaths, sadly speaking, and sadly so. Maybe times are changing, or we hope that times are changing. The late, great Nelson Mandela was also a champion of nonviolence and restorative justice. He lived a full life and died of natural causes. These three stalwarts of nonviolence, their voices live on. And today, as we gather, we are echoing their voices for peace and nonviolence. Coming back to the first reason that I mentioned earlier, UNESCO, and that's a professional reason, UNESCO and the foundation of United Nations global mandate is nonviolent communication. UNESCO, for example, was founded in 1945 after the Second World War, which opposed the famous maxim that if wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men and women that the bastion of peace should be constructed. Such a statement cannot be overemphasized. It must resound over and over in our minds and spur us to action and change in our communities, in our nations, our regions, and all over the world. This is what Mahatma Gandhi represented and still represents, even in death. This is what the great Martin Luther King Jr. and Nelson Mandela represented and still represented in death. On a continuum from prejudice, which leads to discrimination, which also leads to exclusion, hate, and oppression, can result in war. In connection with the UN approach, we recognize that the Sustainable Development Goals of and revitalization of global partnerships on sustainable development. It is this partnership that is important around the globe by all stakeholders to create the sustained impact of nonviolence communication. It is this type of global partnership that is necessary to fight the scourge of hate and discrimination. While there's no international legal definition for hate speech, the United Nations Strategy and Plan of Action for Hate Speech suggest that hate speech as any kind of communication in writing or in speech or behavior that acts or uses pejorative or discriminatory language with reference to a person or group on the basis of who they are. In other words, on the basis of religion, ethnicity, nationality, race, color, descent, gender, or identity. The UN Plan of Action that was mentioned earlier is pragmatic And for those who do not know about the UN Plan of Action and hate speech, I encourage you, and UNESCO encourages you, and the United Nations encourages you to go and to seek this out, to read it, and to see how it becomes relevant to your stakeholder, your community, and your sphere of work. As the United Nations is the subtotal of our member state, the plan of action concerns all countries, governments, and civil society. All actors can play a vital role in promoting nonviolent communication. They must start with some basic principles. And one of that key principles for UNESCO and the United Nations is the respect for the right to freedom of opinion and expression. Actors must also recognize that we need a new generation of digital citizenship and digital citizens, because a lot of the conflict and the violent communication is happening online. And I'm sure we'll be talking a lot more about this later on in our discussion. Thirdly, we need a lot more research in this field of nonviolent communication. We need empirical evidence and grassroots evidence of the root causes. I've shared my personal experience, and that in itself is anecdotal, but it's also empirical because I've lived it and know that nonviolence works. But we need more. We need more research. In connection with question 2, in terms of state actors and educational institutions, education is the key to stimulating and sustaining widespread nonviolent communication. There are many actions of UNESCO and the United Nations in which government and stakeholders can get involved. For example, UNESCO have developed Teacher's Guide for preventing violent extremism and radicalization. We have a program that is called Unite for Heritage, which is a campaign designed to strengthen and mobilize governments and all stakeholders around deliberating to protect cultural heritage as a platform for dialogue and peace and nonviolence. UNESCO, in cooperation with the government of India, in 2012, launched the Mahatma Gandhi Institute for Peace and Sustainable Development. And I'll be speaking a little bit later in the second round about some of the work that we're doing at the UNESCO Mahatma Gandhi Institute for Peace and Sustainable Development. And finally, universities can join the UNESCO Media and Information Literacy and Intercultural Dialogue University Network. This was launched in collaboration with the United Nations Alliance of Civilization, my colleague who is with us, and we will talk a little bit more about the network later on as well. Now, in connection with the stakeholder groups, I think there are 3 broad stakeholder groups that we should consider in our dialogue. Educational institutions, schools and universities, the media, online and offline, and government entities such as libraries, museums, ministries, and other agencies. As I wrap up this first part of our dialogue, for one, schools and universities should revise and develop new curriculum that mainstream issues of pluralism, mutual respect, and empathy. We need new curriculum. Media organizations, both new media and old media, they need to develop internal editorial policies, programs, and monitoring mechanisms to implement and track the impact of nonviolent communication. And finally, government needs national policies, regulations, communication plans, and awareness raising at both the national and community level. To close, before we speak to the pedagogical tools that are needed by schools and university, we should also consider first the type of content and educational framework that should drive nonviolent communication. The issue is that the logical and rational thinking and empiricism is not sufficient to stimulate and sustain nonviolent communication and prevent it. Personally, I think we need new educational pedagogy that helps all human beings to reflect and develop competencies and take actions on 4 fundamental existential principles. 1, issues of origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. We should add to what Professor Kendu mentioned about mutual respect. We need to add issues on precepts about love, forgiveness, justice, and an appreciation that evil actions exist. I want to stop here and we will continue. I'll continue later on in the second round to talk more about some of the pedagogical tools and resources that have been developed by UNESCO and across the UN that stakeholders can use to engage in promoting nonviolent communication. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alton. May I request esteemed speakers to kindly, make shorter interventions so that everyone has a proper chance to have this get passed into this dialogue. Without wasting any time, may I request Mr. Bram Van Haver to kindly share his views from UNESCO to the UN Alliance for Civilization, and also the fact of the matter that it can be linked, this whole idea. So may I request Mr. Bram Van Haver to give his perspectives, and with the humble request that please let us stick to the time so that we have a very focused and a very, very creative and innovative dialogue in this whole process. Thank you. Mr. Haber.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank you for very much for the invitation. It's an honor to meet you all and be part of this very important network of partner organizations. And I think this is a mandate which is more relevant than ever before. So let me start maybe with the first question about how governments and civil societies can work together to actually realize the goals of the plan of action, which was already kindly introduced by Alton from UNESCO. So I won't go into the details of the plan anymore. So let's go to concrete ways about the role of civil society. Let me first start with saying that for UNEOC, working with civil society organizations, including youth-led organizations, is one of the key strategies in the achievement of its mandate, which is building bridges between cultures and religions. And this includes tackling hate speech. So it's not, I mean, for me, it makes sense, for us, it makes sense to say that civil society is playing a key role as well in the plan of action to tackle hate speech. So I think as a first point, I think that civil society plays a very important role in monitoring and reporting hate speech. And that's both online as offline. So I think they play like a key, let's say, watchdog role, right? They have a role to defend democracy, freedom, human rights, etc. I think they should support the governments and tech companies in tackling hate speech. In the end, this could contribute to the creation of a rapid response mechanism in order to respond false or misleading facts that could lead to hate speech. Second place, the role of civil society is also to counterbalance narratives of hatred and mistrust. I think that civil society organization is ideally placed to promote diversity, pluralism, social cohesion, and nonviolence, and nonviolent communication. They are the ideal. They have an ideal role to spread those values by developing alternative narratives. As a third point, I think civil society, and that's what they already do, they raise awareness about the responsibility of social media users and journalists in the increase of hate speech we are seeing the last years. They work with people who are, I would say, formulating or spreading hate speech in order to make them understand the impact of their actions and the responsibility within society. A fourth function of civil society for me is encouraging tech companies to think about innovative solutions to tackle hate speech. And this includes developing their own online tools with algorithms that can track hate speech. when it comes to raising awareness on hate speech, I think that media, tech companies, governments, and civil society, they should work together to develop charters and codes of conduct. Like, for example, the EU Code of Conduct for Social Media. Or in Italy, there was an ethical charter, it's called the Carta di Roma, on how to cover stories on refugees, for example. Which will lead us to a much deeper discussion maybe on ethical journalism. Let me finish my response on the first question with putting emphasis on the role of youth, because if we talk about the role of civil society in supporting governments, we cannot forget that many of those civil society organizations are youth-led organizations, and this is one of the main let's say main strategies as well of UNOC. I would say youth empowerment, including the meaningful participation of youth in decision making, can play an important role in the whole of society preventive approach. So especially through skills development, training, and other forms of engagement. And this is in line with the UN Security Council resolutions 2250, 2419, and the new one recently approved 2535 on youth, peace, and security. One last point on the first question is that let's also, not only youth, we should also include religious leaders in tackling online hate speech and in the plan of action developed by UN. So I think they play a key role. UNOC, for example, is about to start a new project with young religious leaders fighting hate speech in their communities. And we are also creating, together with KAICIT, an online course on the inclusion of youth in using interreligious dialogue to tackle hate speech. Let me go quickly to the second question, how nation states and educational institutions across the world can join to encourage communication, to encourage pluralism, to encourage mutual respect, understanding, etc., and which pedagogical tools could be promoted within this context. Let me start with saying that education for UNOC is key in preventing and countering hate speech online. In line with what Alton said, I think government should include notions of diversity, tolerance, and universal values in their curriculums, in the curriculums of schools and universities. Why? Because bias is something that is already learned from a very early age, often at home. Often by the age of 3, children are already aware of racial differences between people, and by the age of 12, they can already have very strong stereotypes. So the inclusion of those values in curriculums is key. As a second point, I would like to mention that part of this curriculum, part of the values, should be media and information literacy skills, because they can actually reduce narratives of hatred by enhancing critical thinking. So young people can recognize propaganda, and they can themselves build counter or alternative narratives. So we have to embed media literacy into education processes without a doubt. And this means providing training toolkits to teachers, running MOOCs, like massive open online courses, and make sure young people can actually learn by creating their own storytelling. That is one of the key elements. Let's also not forget, and that is very important for UNOC, that it's not only about formal education. Let's not forget informal and non-formal education trainings on the community level that can help mutual understanding and respect, non-violent communication, specifically to the ones related to the skills specifically related to intercultural and interreligious competencies. UNOC has several initiatives that enhance social-emotional competencies of young civil society leaders. And this includes non-violent communication. One of those programs is also together with UNESCO called Youth Waging Peace, in which we actually teach techniques of meditation and mindfulness for peace building. We are very much in favor of the use of innovative pedagogical tools. At UNOC, we use, for example, sport and video games to instill values of empathy, tolerance, and respect for diversity. Another education or pedagogical tool we use at university is youth mobility. For example, we have an exchange program between people of the Middle East and people from Europe and Northern America. But just in general, I think youth mobility is key. I'm talking about internships abroad, exchange programs, internationalization of universities, etc. Another very effective tool is actually organizing encounters with diaspora youth groups and young migrants who have proven to be crucial actors in the promotion of global citizenship education and in representing an immense richness for the hosting societies. And one last point I want to mention before I close my opening remarks is and I think that makes sense for all of us, is of course the formation of university networks, which I think that Alton will talk a little bit more about in his next point, which includes, of course, the Millet network, the Mill network on intercultural dialogue. That's it from my part for the first two questions. I don't know if you already want to hear my remarks on the second round, as I actually have to leave in about 7 minutes, unfortunately. How would you like to proceed?
I feel possibly, I think our friend Brahm has actually covered most of the aspects and most of the pointers to not just the first two questions, possibly even the next two questions. So I think that is something, it has been all encompassing, and as he says that he has just 7 minutes to go. Before, I don't know, like if anyone has any question for him, because others, we have to.
Sorry to interrupt. Can
Yes,
I just
please.
mention one last point? I just have one last point. I think that it fitted more
Yes.
into the third.
No.
Thank you.
No,
Yeah.
just 1 second, Bram. Just
Okay.
along with that last point, can you just add one question, because there was a
Yes.
chat box with
Of course.
specific needed globally for hate speech. That's it. Because then probably you have covered all the 4 questions, and there is no need for the second round for you.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, please. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So about the third question, how we can enable citizens, right, to be peace motivators and engage in meaningful dialogue. Regarding the third question, I think that one last point I would like to mention is the use of communication campaigns, right, or awareness raising campaigns to encourage social media users to call out hateful rhetoric and negative stereotypes. So within this framework, for example, the United Nations has in the past launched this global campaign against racism and xenophobia. It's called Together: Respect, Safety, and Dignity for All. And within the same context, UNOC also created a One Humanity campaign, which is a joint call for solidarity, compassion, and unity among citizens. So in March this year, the High Representative for the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations, Miguel Moratinos, and the Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, Adama Dieng, which is the agency who created the action plan on hate speech, they expressed their grave concern over the increase in stigma and hate speech targeting individuals and groups wrongly vilified, I think, and perceived to be associated with the coronavirus across the globe. So, and this also goes together with UNOC's Spread No Hate initiative, which is actually a platform to engage global media in a dialogue on hate speech. And this includes seminars and a guide for journalists how to report properly on migration and refugees. So that is it from my end. And I would like to thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to.
Thank you, Bram. It was really wonderful listening to you, and definitely we would love to remain connected so that we can do further work with you. Thank you very much for coming. Now I go on to Dr. Maha Bashri, and actually, as Bram has covered all the 4 questions, and it's almost 1 hour that we are into this program. Possibly our next speakers could also, probably look into those other two questions so that we have adequate time for question answer sessions. And also we have some PowerPoint presentation for our next two speakers. So that would be very worthwhile. In fact, now as I invite Dr. Mahabashri to please give her point of views into this whole dialogue. Dr. Mahabashri from the United Arab Emirates University.
Thank you very much, Professor Kondo and Professor Jakhtar. Can you hear me? Everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Maha.
Okay. So I am going to talk about, let me just share my screen here. I'm going to be talking about media and information literacy and how it can help combat violent speech or hate speech. So let's just start this from the beginning. So media and information literacy education is very important when it comes to, or as a tool for an empowered, engaged, and nonviolent citizenry. And this is what we're trying to do here. Now, when we talk about media and information literacy, there are many aspects or perspectives to it. I am going to be focusing on the critical media literacy, which is, if we are to define it, the ability to create meaning, understanding from visual and verbal symbols that our audiences are exposed to. Violent or hate speech, if we want to counteract it, you have to have a citizenry and audiences who are able to detect it in the first place. So our audiences need to be active rather than passive users of the content that they are exposed to. Exposure, obviously, especially with our youth nowadays, there is a lot of social media going on. They're exposed to different platforms. It's at the touch of their fingers. We would want them from an academic or a curricular perspective to be active rather than passive users of content. Now, media and information literacy education, we see it as a solution to the negative media effects, such as the violence that the media depicts, gender, racial stereotyping, stereotyping against people with different sexual orientations, and news bias. We would like to, I think that curricula should be able to give or equip citizens and youth especially with the skills needed to counteract the hate speech that we see a lot nowadays, especially online. So media or critical media literacy involves critical thinking, which is the crux of fighting hate speech. Individuals have to have certain skills that enable them to be active participants in their respective societies. And usually from a scholarly perspective, we say there are 4 skills that are needed for youth and individuals to be able to counteract the different forms of hate speech that they see. And that is access. They know how to access information, where to access information, what type of sources they should be accessing for credible information, analysis of what they're accessing, evaluation. You need to have the skill to evaluate the information. There's a lot of fake news, for example, that is floating around. We need to equip our students, our youth, our citizens with the skills that will help them evaluate whether the information is true, false, credible, coming from a credible source or not. And finally, creation of information or production of the actual information. And research, empirical research has shown that youngsters, youth who produce information can actually evaluate other information that they're exposed to in, they have the right skills to evaluate other information that they're exposed to. So critical media literacy grants participants in society a central role. As we said earlier, they're not passive users, a central role in interpreting what they're seeing, critically analyzing and producing the content. And again, that will help us counteract the hate speech that we see a lot of nowadays. Now, when you have these skills, individuals have a sense of self and social awareness. and they are actively participating in understanding and, most importantly, deconstructing media content. Critical media literacy lies or is grounded in the idea that we equip our audiences with the ability to deconstruct and understand the messages that they're being exposed to. So specifically in my field of communication, as academics, our role is to design curricula that cements these skills that are needed to help our students, our citizens, to navigate the media and information deluge that they're exposed to, especially in contemporary society. So our role as academics in the field of communication is designing curricula, as I said, that I apologize for this, that cements these skills. Now, critical media literacy is a stepping stone into nonviolent communication. Communication is a process whereby you have a sender and a receiver and a message in the middle with a lot of noise. The lot of noise that we are referring to here in this case can be, hateful, violent speech. Knowledge is power, as the late Kofi Annan said. Information liberates you. And education, how we educate our citizenry, is the premise of progress in every society, in every family. And this is what our role is in academia. Now, if we're to look at a model that looks at critical media literacy as a way to combat nonviolent communication, the first step is that it provides the knowledge or the skills that are needed to equip our students, our youth, our citizens to navigate the media landscape and the messages that they're exposed to. The second step would be the message comprehension and deconstruction. And as I said earlier, message deconstruction is very, very important in this case. The third step would be understanding the other. And this is what we're seeing a lot of. A lot of the hate speech that is floating around in the cyber sphere these days on different platforms comes from all these ideas of conspiracy theories and not understanding the other. There are 191 countries around the world. This is an example I always tend to give my students. We are not going to travel to the 191 countries around the world. We're not going to meet everybody who comes from a different part of the world. It's the media and the messages and what we see in different platforms that exposes us to the other. We cannot understand the other unless we know how to get sources or news from sources that are not biased, that are critical and that are fair, and don't necessarily carry news that is violent in its nature. And finally, this understanding of the other leads to nonviolent communication. And that's what we want to achieve here when we equip our students and our citizens with these skills. Final thoughts on this, because we're running out of time. I had 2 more slides, but we'll leave them for now. If we have time, I'll come back to them later. Is that, as you can see in the diagram I have up here, we have, this is the communication model that we teach all our students, that you have a sender and a receiver, and then you have feedback and you have message. The noise that we're seeing, there's a bombardment of information nowadays on digital media, especially, that youth and citizens are exposed to. Our job in academia is to equip people to navigate through this noise so that they are able to communicate effectively, kindly, and with empathy with other people. And on that note, I would like to turn the floor back to you.
Thank you, Maha, for your very apt and pointed points. Friends, let me share with you an important Gandhian dimension to counter hate speech is to disseminate truth and the facts. It's all the more important in the context of the fake news and disinformation campaign that the world. In fact, if people get swayed by falsehood and negative rhetoric, it has to be challenged by truthfulness. And way back in 1926, Mahatma Gandhi had said that the way to peace is the way of truth. Truthfulness is even more important than peacefulness. Indeed, lying is the mother of violence. The truth of a few will count, the untruth of millions will vanish, even like a shaft before whip of wind. So those challenging hate speech they may be small in number, but they need to remain perseverant with their facts and truthful information. Friends, our next speaker is Ms. Sara Gabai, and she is she is doing a PhD on the countering hate speech, and it will be really very exciting to listen to her. Sara.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me and can you see my shared screen?
We can hear you, Sara. Yes.
Can you see on the screen?
Yes, silence is violence.
So, I'm a humble practitioner who works with humble people whose English might not be their first language. So I will try to give my take on what nonviolence communication means to me and the work I have been doing in the region for over a decade. Let me start by saying that the failure to communicate about injustice is violence. And this is the first thing I want to communicate to our audience. In our contemporary media culture, truth, power, visibility often belong to those who tell the better story. What is the problem with this? The problem is that usually it's the negative, violent, and traumatic stories that get mainstreamed as the better stories against positive, non-violent, and healing experiences. These negative media representations have a huge impact on both societies and individuals. And what is the consequence of this impact? Is the increased ignorance, it's the increased prejudice, the violence, and the hatred. One of the most contemporary example is found in how those COVID-19 stories are written all around the world. So the anti-Chinese rhetoric that, for example, has been used in news media by our politicians and also on social media has greatly fueled racism, xenophobia, discrimination, violence, and intolerance against Asians or also Asian people of Asian descent. This has happened in the West, but also in Asian countries. And this is why Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, has urged governments to act now to strengthen the immunity of our societies against the virus of hate, which arguably is even worse than the virus we all are getting to know during these very hard times. So what is the problem here? That the power of these stories is that these stories come to life. They're not just stored in a magazine, in a newspaper, in a blog, in a social media post. No, these stories come to life. And as Human Rights Watch has recently reported, there have been a huge number of reports of violence, discrimination, harassment in Italy against people of Asian descent. In Malaysia, migrant workers and Rohingya refugees have been accused of spreading the virus. The discriminations against Chinese people has also been reported in countries like South Korea, Japan, Indonesia, and even most importantly, the story that doesn't get told oftentimes is that discriminatory measures and violence has been also targeted to the largest African community living in China. This shows how hate is transboundary. It goes beyond borders everywhere. So it is very important, as our colleagues in WHO also noted, that we do not profile these cases based on racial, religious, and ethnic lines. Hate has become too often the buzzword nowadays. And when we practitioners work in digital media culture, online hate speech has become also a very popular term, like we see tonight. Almost more than 100 people who have joined this webinar are more or less aware and familiar about hate and hate speech. But be careful, hate is not new. Maybe every generation has spoke about hate differently, because the generation of my parents, for example, of my grandparents, did not have online hate speech. They didn't have those digital technologies. But hate is not new. And so the questions that I ask myself every day in my work is, can we transform violent narratives into peaceful stories? Did the ones who came before us succeed? With the new tools that we have at hand, what can we do differently and perhaps better? So I agree with peace journalist Jake Lynch when he says that a society at peace is not one without conflict, rather one in which there is an abundance of resources for effective nonviolent responses to conflict and hate. My dear colleagues and friends, I do believe that conflict will be everlasting, but it's about how we deal with conflict that will really make a change in this world. And so, let me tell you that as our colleagues correctly said and discussed, there are plenty of resources out there that have been produced. They're already in our hands. And I would also argue that sometimes the teachers who are working every day in their classrooms might not have the access to these resources. Sometimes it's not translated in local language. Sometimes the languages are too complicated. Sometimes the people who produce these resources have a very different experience from the local teacher who's teaching in a village. But nevertheless, these resources are there. And now it is the time to use them. Educators, activists, peace builders, everyone, even us individuals. So as the visibility of hate increases or is increasing exponentially, we all have a duty and a responsibility to raise the visibility of peace. We have this responsibility. And the way I have tackled this issue is through cultural resistance. So sometimes our conversation might seem too abstract, but here I want to give you some solutions of what has worked in several contexts and what I hope all of you can go back home and practice in your communities, in your classrooms, in your societies. Cultural resistance implies the use of culture to counteract, resist, respond to the hateful narratives through peaceful means and bring about change. I'm not talking about big changes. The small changes are those who create the loudest echo in our societies. So this is a graffiti that was drawn by an artist, and that for me, for example, is an act of cultural resistance. This is a graffiti that represents Sonia, the owner of a Chinese restaurant in Rome, who has, due to the COVID propaganda, let's say, anti-Chinese or anti-Italian Chinese, has lost a lot of customers, as many others. The artist Laika drew this next to her restaurant. And what does this slogan say? An epidemic of ignorance is spreading. We must protect ourselves. Let the people who walk through the streets contemplate this message, developing their critical minds, hopefully. It's an act of cultural resistance. We can talk about Massimiliano Martigli Giang, an Italian Chinese who stood in Florence hours with just a simple sign, blindfolded and with his mask. I'm not a virus. I'm a human being. Free me from prejudice. Or other manifestations of online artists that showed solidarity between China and Italy. This is how nonviolent communication looks like in our generation. I also want to introduce you, some might already know about this, the fact that social media is an incredible tool if used with the right notions of peace, education, and nonviolent communication. France has been identified as one of the most xenophobic country with the rise of COVID. And what did those Asian French diaspora communities do? They started the hashtag Je ne suis pas un virus. What happened with this hashtag? It went viral. Other Asians, not necessarily Chinese, picked up this hashtag and started to humanize themselves, to tell their stories, to tell their challenges of being in a country where they're treated as a virus. And so from this campaign, others are inspired. This was the Health Not Hate, for example, was very widely spread in Canada, and there are many others out there. The health issue is an issue of all, and COVID indeed affects all, but racism doesn't have to affect all necessarily. So we have the power to rewrite our culture, to change those notions and values of racism, xenophobia, homophobia, sexism, discrimination, that even the most peaceful people can fall into them. And we can replace them with nonviolence, with peace, with justice, with respect, with tolerance, with a sensibility towards human rights. So, to just close my intervention, we have the power to make those peace stories the better story. And I encourage all of you to work towards this objective. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, very short, but it really reflects what I feel. And everyone has the power to make a change in their community. This is a very important message. Thank you all.
You, Sarah, when you are saying make peace stories the better stories, here I am reminded of this beautiful quote, which is in sync of what you have said from Mahatma Gandhi, who had written way back in 1946. Mahatma Gandhi writes, I suggested in 1920 the use of non-violence and its inevitable twin companion truth for canalizing hatred into the proper channel. The hater hates not for the sake of hatred, but because he wants to drive away from his country the hated being or beings. We have discovered through our progress that in the application of nonviolence, we have been able to reach the mass mind far more quickly and far more extensively than ever before. The efficacy of nonviolent action and nonviolent communication. That's why we need to make each story a peace story and peace stories a better stories. Thank you, Sarah, for this poignant, very sharp, very focused intervention. Now we request Mr. Matthew Johnson to kindly share his presentation and his talk on this subject. Thank you. Matthew.
Thank you. And thank you to all of the speakers who've come before me, who have really made my job a lot easier because they've said so many of the things that, that really I can only echo about the importance of media literacy, about the importance of helping young people and all of us be users and creators of media so that we can answer back when we encounter prejudice and hate. At Media Smarts, we've been working for more than 20 years to address hate online and in other media, to help young people learn how to communicate non-violently and without conflict, and to be empathetic when they're communicating through media. And of course, in recent years, that is primarily through digital media. So what I'm going to focus on in the next couple of minutes is the way in which we approach that, both in our research and in our resources for the classroom and for parents. Let me just make sure I have, not what I wanted to share. Hang on. It doesn't look like my PowerPoint is up. I'm not sure why.
We can see it.
Oh, you can see it. All right. I don't get to see it. You see it. All right. So in Media Smarts, we work from the Canadian conception of media literacy that was developed in the 1980s and 1990s, which is based on a critical lens that uses key concepts of media literacy. And we apply these key concepts to communicate media and digital literacy across the curriculum. So in really, ideally, every part of one's schooling, whether it's in a literature or a language class, whether it's in a health class, even in a mathematics or a science class. And the key concepts approach also allows us to customize the message to be appropriate to a child's developmental age and also to different communities and the ways that different people and cultures are consuming media. So whether we are teaching a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old, whether the students are consuming Hollywood mass media or whether they're consuming culture in another language, and that's something that we do encounter a lot in Canada, as we have a very multicultural population. These key concepts can be used as a critical lens to examine whatever media they are using and consuming. So we have two sets of key concepts, and these first 5 key concepts, what we call the key concepts of media literacy, are those that were developed in the 1980s when media literacy was first made part of the Canadian curriculum. The most important of these is the idea that media are constructions, that media don't accurately reflect reality. They were made by somebody, and those people who made them made choices. And those choices that they made, what they included, what they left out, how things are inflected, how things are presented, have social and political implications, because who is presented as a hero, who is presented as a villain, who gets time at all, who is represented and who is invisible, all of these things, whether they're conscious choices or not, have an impact on us because we unconsciously view media as reality. As we heard earlier, most of us will have limited experience of the world and of other people in person, but we have these experiences through media. And so even when we're aware that media are constructions, they still shape our view of reality. It's also important to realize, though, that audiences negotiate meaning, that the meaning of a media text doesn't come just from the media makers, it's negotiated by the audience. And so if I see myself reflected or not reflected in a media text, I'll bring a different meaning to that. And that's a very empowering message for young people to learn as well, that they bring their own meaning, they bring their own experience, and it gives them the power to answer back when, for instance, they feel that they're not represented accurately. Of course, media have commercial implications. At the very least, it costs money to make media. And of course, most media, whether we're talking traditional or digital media, are made in order to make money. And finally, each medium has a unique aesthetic form, or as Marshall McLuhan rather put it, the medium is the message. The way that a story is told or a message is communicated is inevitably shaped by the medium and the genre. And so that's where the technical aspect of media literacy comes in, because we have to understand something about media and genre to really be able to analyze the text. So when we look at digital media, every one of those still applies, particularly some of them more than ever. It used to be that you had a fair idea of how you were paying something for something. But nowadays, with social media, for instance, we know from our research that most young people don't understand how they're paying for things like Instagram or Snapchat or Facebook or Google. But there are also distinct differences between digital and traditional media. And the first of those is the first of our second set of key concepts, the idea that digital media are networked. So we've moved from a model where there are creators of media who create a text or a signal and they communicate it, and it's a one-way model. And we've moved to a network where now all of us are both consumers and creators. And all of us now have access to really the same platforms, the same methods of communication, the same methods of distributing media that the large media companies do. We can communicate a video worldwide through YouTube or Instagram or Snapchat or Facebook. And so we have to recognize that that implies a number of things that are distinct about digital networked media. So one of those is that digital media are shareable and persistent, because of course, when we're distributing things online, we're actually making copies. When I send an email, I'm not actually sending something except an instruction to someone else's server to make a copy of that email. Even when we're watching streaming video like on Netflix or YouTube, a copy is being made. It's just being destroyed as it's being made, but it's trivially easy in most cases to make a permanent copy. And so those are also shareable. Those copies themselves are shareable, and it's very hard. Once something is out there, it's very, very difficult to get rid of it. Because of that, digital media have unexpected audiences. When I send something online, whether it's a post or a photo or whatever, I have no way of predicting who is going to see it. But also, because digital media are networked, we ourselves may be unexpected audiences. It's very easy to stumble upon something that we hadn't seen, that we hadn't intended to see. And of course, that is really significant for hate groups, because we know that they use cloaked hate sites to attract possible recruits. But they also participate in mainstream sites like Twitter or Reddit in order to mainstream their message. It's also important to realize that because they're interactive, digital media can have a real impact. And as we'll see, that has a positive and a negative side. But compared to traditional media, again, where most of us were passive consumers, with digital media, we can have an impact, and they can have an impact, a more personal impact on us. And of course, that's where the whole phenomenon of cyberbullying comes in, but also the personal impacts of online hate as well. And finally, just like the medium of a message shapes its meaning, the technology that we use, the tools that we use, influence how we use them. And so all of these platforms, whether it's Google, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Facebook, whether it's WhatsApp, the structure, the affordances, what they allow us to do, what is the default use and what's optional, all of these things influence our use of them. And there are some fundamental aspects of digital communication that shape our experience as well. So how does this apply to things like online hate and communication? Well, some of them are pretty obvious. This is one of the most obvious examples, of course, of the concept that media have social and political implications. Most of the time, we're talking about unintentional choices having political implications, such as who's cast as the lead or who do you get to play in a video game. But when we look at hate, we see often that they are very conscious ones. But they don't necessarily have to be intended as a serious message to have a serious impact. So on the left here, we'll see a recent meme that is protesting mask wearing with a side order of Islamophobia. So having both a dangerous public health message encouraging people not to wear masks and using Islamophobia to justify it. And that's one of the things that we've seen with online hate groups, is that they're finding connections with other communities. And so they're using something that's currently popular among a wide number of online users, and that is the opposition to masking, and using that to communicate an Islamophobic message. But the meme on your right is an example of how something that seems as though it was intended just as humor also has a powerful political message. And here it's sending the message that girls cannot be real fans of science fiction. That may seem trivial, but it's part of a much broader trend and a much broader current of sexism in online communities. And we know, in fact, that it was what was called the Gamergate phenomenon a few years ago, where there was a real pushback against the participation of women in science fiction video games that was in many ways the flashpoint where the different hate groups online, the misogynists, the white supremacists, the anti-Semites, and so on, really came together in a single group. Audiences negotiating meaning is one of the real challenges to analyzing and discussing online hate, because depending on what group you're in, the same messaging can have very different meanings. So here, for instance, is someone asking, does anyone think the Karen slur is woman hating and based on class prejudice? So if you're not familiar with it, Karen is the term that's used in many memes for a white woman who uses her privilege to cause trouble for other people, often by involving the police or other authorities. And that trouble is often directed at people of color or other people of a lower social status. So depending on who you are, you may see this as a dangerous sexist slur, as the first person here is saying it's sexist, classist, and ageist, or you might see it as an accurate reflection of racial dynamics. How we interpret it has a lot to do with who we are. And so in order to talk about hate online, in order to talk about political communication online, we have to respect that. We have to understand that key concept, that we all bring our own meaning, and what is offensive to one person, or in particular what is not offensive to one person, might be offensive or not offensive to another, and that those are valid, that we have to extend our empathy. And that's what this key concept is fundamentally about, is extending our empathy to other people to be able to see, I understand that this representation is perhaps not offensive to me, but to understand that it is offensive to someone else, maybe who is part of the group that's being represented. As I mentioned already, digital media having unexpected audiences is one of the keys to understanding how hate movements recruit online. And this is a quote that came from a teacher that we interviewed some years back, and is an example of how often young people encounter hate content when doing research for school. And this is intentional on the part of hate groups, that they create cloaked hate sites that represent themselves as sources of valid information or sources of debate, but are actually ways of communicating hate content. And we've heard again and again of how many times young people have encountered these. Until relatively recently, the top result in Google for Dr. Martin Luther King was actually a cloaked hate site that had been created by a white supremacist group to discredit him. Unfortunately, that's been taken off the web, but many of these sites still exist. Fundamentally, though, what is the biggest obstacle to nonviolent communication online is the fact that digital media experiences are shaped by the tools that we use, because they privilege inflammatory content. So we see that things that are outrageous, things that are controversial, things that result in strong reactions, positive or negative, are favored by recommendation algorithms. Whether it's YouTube, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, almost any recommendation algorithm is more likely to recommend things to you if other people have responded strongly to it. And we've seen that fake news, that hate content, all of these things get boosted by people's reactions. And we just saw that not long ago with mask protests, where in fact they were trending on Twitter mostly because people were reacting to them. We actually saw that just yesterday in Canada, where a racist hashtag was trending, and the reason it was trending was because people were arguing against it. But if you only saw the hashtag, just reading the headline in a newspaper, you would think that many people supported this hashtag. But it's beyond that. It's beyond even the algorithms. Because digital media are interactive, radicalization is not just one way. Broadcasters, such as influencers or YouTubers, can be radicalized by their own audiences. And here's an example of this from Instagram. So this is, she started out as a beauty influencer. She originally mostly posted beauty tips and glamour photos of herself. She fell into the QAnon conspiracy. And here she is posting that QAnon and Pizzagate, which is an associated conspiracy theory, are real. But you can see the second comment here is one of her followers actually radicalizing her, because her follower is complaining that she hasn't posted anything about an even crazier conspiracy theory, which is that this online furniture retailer was selling children on its catalog through some kind of code. And so her follower is actually saying, well, I think they've gotten to you because you haven't said anything about it. And so we see this as a two-way radicalization process happening here because digital media are networked. The influencer is radicalizing many of her followers, but some of her followers are actually radicalizing her. And you can see how this becomes a vicious cycle. And finally, of course, interactions through digital media can have real impact, whether we're talking about cyberbullying in general, whether we're talking about online hate. We know from our research, and this is from a research project we did last year about prejudice online, 80% of the students that we surveyed think that people are more likely to say prejudiced things online than offline. So this is fundamentally a digital problem. That's not to say that hate speech never occurs offline, because it absolutely does. But it is made easier online for a variety of reasons. And most of those reasons have to do with online communication, that we don't have the same things that trigger empathy in us. And so we feel immune to consequences of what we do, but people are also less likely to take a step back when they unintentionally hurt someone or offend someone, but they're also more likely to double down when they get resistance. They're more likely to hold on to their stand. So what we do in our resources is we try to teach students to avoid these empathy traps. And by empathy traps, we mean the features of digital communication, whether it's the features of a specific platform or of digital communication in general, that keep us from feeling empathy in situations where we normally would. So for instance, right now, I can see my face and I can see one other person, but most of the participants, I can't see your faces. I don't know how you're responding to my words. I'm not getting that kind of feedback that I would get offline. And so that makes it very hard for me to feel empathy. It makes it very hard for me to know how you're reacting to what I'm saying. We also have to make and teach students to make a conscious habit of practicing perspective taking, of putting ourselves in other people's shoes, because it is so much harder for us to feel empathy. We have to teach them to recognize hot emotions, because one of the other consequences of digital media is that because we experience almost everything through our eyes rather than our bodies, we often don't recognize how something is making us feel. We don't recognize our own emotions. And so we have to teach kids to consciously be aware of the tension in their bodies, their heart rate, the flush in the cheeks, those things that tell you that you're mad, because you may not even realize that something is making you angry. It will affect how you respond unless you're conscious of it. And also we recommend that when young people are in conflict with someone they know, they take it offline, because it is so much easier to communicate. And that's part of why we do the research, is to identify strategies that young people are already using that are working like that. That's an insight that came from our research with young people, and then publicize it to say, this is something other young people have said works for them, you try it. So when we talk about casual prejudice or hate online, it's important to know that most young people are opposed to it. 70% of young people say that any experience of casual prejudice, whether it's against them, whether it's against someone they know, or whether it's against anybody, hurts their feelings. So this is something that they are not immune to. It's something that it doesn't just, roll off of them. It is something that hurts them. So why don't they push back? Well, it's because in an online environment, we get our cues about the values of that environment from the loudest 10%. It's very easy for those loud voices to dominate the conversation and to make us feel as though their views are dominant. And that was one of the things we found consistently, was that even though the vast majority of young people were opposed to hate online and found that it was hurtful, they did not feel that their peers felt the same way. Why don't they push back? Well, half have seen other people encourage it. Half are afraid of making things worse or not knowing what to say or do to make a difference. And a few feel that people are looking for an excuse to be offended. But again, this is a failure of empathy, because many of the same people feel that it hurts them themselves. So we need to take advantage of the fact that digital media can have real impact and teach young people to make their voices heard, to teach them that they can be that louder 10%, that they can shape the values of the communities that they're in. The reasons that they tend not to push back: they don't know what to say or do. They don't know if the person meant to be prejudicial. There's a lack of empathy again. And finally, moral disengagement, that frequently they will come up with reasons to justify or excuse it. And we know again that moral disengagement is easier when we're communicating through a screen, whether it's something like online hate speech or cyberbullying, or whether it's something like sharing a text that someone sent you. It's much easier to ignore the moral consequences and the moral dimension of our actions when we're communicating online. And finally, the reasons that youth are most likely to push back, what we're trying to promote in the resources that we're developing based on this research, first, of course, was empathy. If they knew what happened hurt someone, they were more likely to push back. And that's why it's important for them to know that most of them are hurt by it. They also felt, again, that if most people agreed with them, if there was a consensus, they were more likely to respond. And that's something that we found with cyberbullying as well, that most people do feel it's wrong. And if they feel that other people feel it's wrong, they're more likely to push back. And they also felt very strongly that there are important things that platforms can do, that platforms like Facebook or YouTube or all the other places where they communicate, that there are many things that they can do. And that again introduces another dimension of digital citizenship. And that is that we can make a difference as members of our communities, but we can also make a difference by complaining to the platforms. And one of the key elements of digital citizenship that we try to teach is that you are not just a passive, helpless consumer of these platforms. You have power as a consumer, and that you can get them to change their policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think because we are running short of time, actually. Yeah. So what I would suggest now is that actually there were two more questions, but I think most of the speakers have covered, those all four questions. To be more fairer to the participants, I feel that we could request them to say 2 or 3 questions max. And then if any of the speakers would like to add on those. And then finally, we have our chairperson, to wrap up the session. We have around 15 to 17 minutes to go to finish this e-conference. So may I request, if there are any specific good questions, pointed questions for any of the esteemed speakers, kindly write in the chat box, or we would then, if there are no pointed questions, we could ask each of the speaker, whosoever want to speak for 2 minutes max, any further points if they want to share or add, before I request our chairperson of the day, Professor Jagtar Singh Ji, to give his wrapping up speech, concluding speech, chairperson's remarks. Anyone having any question finally? Any pointed question? And also I would request Mr. Pankaj to kindly share the feedback link, so that the audience can share the feedback form. Mr. Pankaj, please share the feedback form. Meanwhile, if there are any final questions for anyone, any of the speakers, kindly quickly ask, or we give say 2 minutes max to each of the speaker in case they want to speak. Then yeah, there is no question, no question. I will just wait for 1 more minute in case if there is no questions for any of the speaker. Then in case any of the esteemed speaker would like 1 second, 1 second. I think there is one question. How non-violent practice can contribute for developing country to the sustainable development goal? How practice of non-violence? And then bit more on the whole concept of being rational and the whole idea of being argumentative in media parlance. Probably first question, how practice of non-violence can contribute for developing countries to achieve the sustainable development goal. Who would like to speak? Possibly Alton, would you like to speak on that? How the practice of non-violence and non-violent communication lead to sustainable development practices by countries?
Yes, Dr. Kundu, I want to say something, because in the beginning we planned that there will be 2 rounds of questions. So the first speaker,
Yes,
Dr. Alton Grezel, had to wait for the second round of the. So now I
yes,
think Alton is the best person. Not others can't answer it. This question can be answered by Alton, I think, and he should be given a little bit more time, because had he known that this will conclude like this, then he would have continued there also. I think Alton,
yes.
you should be able to answer this question and add what is
How?
the meaning. You want to say something?
Yes, certainly. Thank you so much, Professor Kendu. Yeah, I understand very much the issue of time constraints. UNESCO has organized many webinars, and there's always a challenge. I do have a lot more I want to say, but time will not allow. Just to give a basic response to the question that was asked, how can nonviolence communication help to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal? I mean, the obvious response is that conflicts and wars, in fact, take away from the focus on real development. When there is conflict, it threatens development. It hinders development. It stops development. And so the less conflict we have, the less disagreement that we have among developing nations and partners and stakeholders, then the more we can advance toward the sustainable development goals. That's the biggest hindrance, in fact, to sustainable development. It is human solidarity. It is reaching consensus on the steps and actions that need to be taken for sustainable development. And so when we can remove that from the equation, we can expect that sustainable development will be accelerated. I think one point that I want to emphasize that, as I said, there are many things that I want to share. I think Sarah said it very correctly. The resources are there. There are many resources out there. UNESCO has developed many, and I encourage you to go to our website to see the resources that we've developed on nonviolence communication, anti-hate, and around media and information literacy. UNESCO is one of the global leaders in the field of media and information literacy. But one point I want to stress, which I think the last speaker spoke a little bit about, but I want to stress, Matthew spoke a little bit about the issue of emotional and social learning. Because while we need critical thinking, while critical thinking is very important, what we are finding from research carried out by the UNESCO Mahatma Gandhi Institute on Education for Sustainable Development and Peace is that social and emotional learning or social intelligence is central to rethinking education and to preparing especially young people for the increasingly complex world. The issue is that as we look at what Matthew presented and some of what Sarah presented, and even Professor Maha, we cannot expect people to act only based on critical thinking and informed decision making. All right, this is it's necessary, but it's not sufficient to achieve nonviolent communication and to sustain anti-hate. We need to go beyond critical thinking, even though UNESCO is the champion for media and information literacy. Because quite often, what do we find is that people operate and act upon their emotions. They act upon their emotions at the expense of their intellect, at the expense of the information that is before them. You know, this is why certain negative news is going viral, because of the emotions that people attach to them. To put it another way, all right, our emotions often suppress our intellect. And so I think Matthew outlined it very well, that we need to do more to capacitate individuals around the world to be able to manage their emotions and to develop social literacy skills. Through the UNESCO Mahatma Gandhi Institute for Education and Peace, there are many models that have been developed in the program around social and emotional learning. One that is important that I want to leave with the audience is the issue of the dynamic interaction between self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision making. All right, it's a broad spectrum of social emotional learning that we all need. We can see how media and information literacy is implicated in self-awareness, all right, whether it's about our digital footprint online, in self-management, you know, in terms of how we verify information before we decide to share or not share, the issues of how we can engage with hate and online hate and violent content, as Matthew pointed out. And so we can see how we can have a greater impact over time if we combine critical thinking competencies through media and information literacy with emotional and social learning. This is what UNESCO is championing moving forward, and we're calling on stakeholders to do that as they try to action and put into practice the UN Plan of Action against online hate. Just to say to you that UNESCO and the Mahatma Gandhi Institute will be launching a global lesson on social and emotional learning. It's going to start on International Peace Day, which is the 21st of September. We encourage you to go online, search about this global lesson on social and emotional learning, and to get involved in the process. I want to end with a quote from John Starks, which said, "It's not the mountain that we conquer, but ourselves. It's not the mountain that we conquer, but ourselves. It's not the mountain of hate information and violent information, but it's ourselves. And if as individuals, we can recognize the important role that we can play and to self-empower, then as Sarah pointed out, we can make a change. A change can start with the small voices, and these small voices can turn into a great wave for change through nonviolence communication, embedded and contextualized in media and information literacy and social and emotional learning." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alton, for your information. Gandhi Smriti and Darshan Samiti is part of the UNESCO NGIP Global Collective Initiative on the Socio-Emotional Learning. And in fact, the other day, I was part of that discussion of the Global Collective. So that is A. And B, also let me share with you all the participants and honored speakers that Gandhi Smriti is running this free online course on nonviolent communication, and in fact, not just participants within India, but also abroad have been taking part and doing this course. More than 4,500 people have already done this course. With the permission of the chair, we have a very apt and very focused, presentation by Alton and Matthew. permission of the chair, may I request Dr. Maha, Bashri, and Sara to give quick 1-2 minutes maximum intervention, because probably they also did not get time to speak on those two questions. So is it possible, Jagtar sir?
Dr. Vedvyas can do. The experts are here. Because of our invitation, we have to give them the opportunity. All
Yes.
Sarah, Maha, and Matthew. If still they want to say something, they are free. I can conclude within 2 minutes, no problem. So
Dr. Maha,
let them say something.
please go ahead. Dr. Maha, please go ahead.
No, yeah.
Just one last point that I'd like to emphasize. That is, we have to empower individuals. This idea that we operate only on emotions, I think, is a bit outdated from a media effects perspective, because our media consumers are not passive. They're not passive actors online. And as Matthew had mentioned earlier, you have kids coming up to you and saying, well, I don't know why I posted something hateful online. I just did because I did. I think we need to hold up a mirror to these people, or to youngsters and individuals. And when we equip them with the critical thinking skills, people will, if you sit down and talk to people as to why they wrote what they wrote, and to have better representations, media representations of everyone, we need to see people that look like us, that have the same background like us across the world. I think it's going to be a better way to navigate what's happening online. As Sarah said earlier, hate has always been there. It's not going to go away, even if we combat it and come up with all these policies and curricula and so forth. But if we can equip more people with these skills, I think we do have rational actors in the media landscape nowadays. People will think rationally and will act accordingly if you hold up that mirror and you hold them responsible for what they post online and what they say to others. So these are my 2 cents to sum up what, the presentation.
Thank you so much. And if I can also add something that adds to what Dr. Maha said. For me, you cannot overcome or understand hate speech without understanding freedom of expression. What I've seen as a human rights activist is that everyone invokes their right to freedom of expression without knowing what this right means. The right to freedom of expression comes with limitations legally. Because if you are harming someone else by exercising your freedom of expression, this is not admissible. If we don't understand that accompanied through media literacy, accompanied through cultural literacy, accompanied to any kind of literacy that every teacher is teaching, even mathematical literacy, everything has to be done through a human rights lens. And it's here that I feel there is the biggest gap. The gap that our kids, our adults, our grandparents, our parents do not know human rights education. And because if we teach that there is a limit to freedom of expression, if we're hurting someone, then we can start formulating what hate speech is, how it can be counteracted. Where are those boundaries that we cannot trespass? And so this is just my final comment that is related to question 1. And also addressing to the audience, Thailand has initiated some years ago a media literacy program from the blind with amazing activists who are tirelessly working for that, also involved in the media literacy network. I would be happy to connect you with our school in Pattaya or our network for that. And you can share the lessons of how they have done it with people with disabilities, the blind, the physically impaired, and media literacy for many of them was the source of a job or, also a personal development. So I can share more of that individually, bilaterally if needed. Thank you.
You, Sarah, I think now we should give the floor to our chairperson of the day. It was really wonderful listening to each one of you. It was really we learned a lot from each other. And now the floor is open for the chairperson of the day, Professor Jagtar Singh ji.
Yeah, first of all, I want to share my feeling with all of you that I am feeling now that when the discussion was moving in the right direction, we came to end of this time, panel discussion. So that's the
Exactly.
feeling. I think next time we will have to organize it again to continue from where we have stopped.
Yes, we're just getting ready for dialogue right now.
Yeah. And then first of all, I want to tell what happened behind the scene. One day Vedvyas Kundu called me that we should do something on hate speech. And then day and night we were discussing who should be the speaker. And Elton is saying media and information literacy curriculum for teachers. Huh? That's what is Elton? Yeah, other. I'm going to speak. Your policy and strategy guide. Coming to it. So when we are talking about whether it is non-violent communication by Mahatma Gandhi or it is intercultural dialogue, interfaith dialogue, or interreligious dialogue, what UNESCO is promoting. It is same thing. Language is different, but we are moving in the same direction. If we are talking of God, there are different stairs. God is there only, but you can follow any stair to go there. We are to stop hate speech. So we are to follow anything to do that. So if we can have conflicts and wars. Ultimately, we will have to sit across the table and have a dialogue for peace, harmony, and the motive is live and let live. So if we want that the motive is live and let live, so then there should be no discrimination. There should be no discretion, because wherever there is a discrimination and discretion, it leads to corruption. And in pluralistic countries like India, South Asian countries, and global, worldwide, we are living. So there should not be any cultural hegemony. There should be respect for different cultures also. And there should be no othering. There should be no othering at all. There should be no exclusion. And there should be no intolerance. And for that, we are talking, IFLA is talking of freedom of access to information and freedom of expression. Freedom of expression doesn't mean that one should do murders in the name of freedom of expression. The hate speech one should be sensitive about. As in non-violent communication, Mahatma Gandhi has said that this language should be very sensitive. We should be sensitive about the language. And similarly, see the basic thing, the war and peace starts from here. Everything is with our thinking. If we are able to change our thinking, then our feelings and actions will also change. When our feelings and actions will change, there will certainly be peace, harmony, and sustainable development. Wherever there is a conflict, see, when we come about the classes, I think there may be many races, castes, and communities, but there are only two classes. One is ruling class, and one is the ruled class. And rules are for the ruled class, not for the rural class. So those four pillars, when I am seeing in the Indian context, whether it is parliament, executive, politician, judiciary, or media, what is happening? As Matthew was saying, a digital media has massive range, and you have a wide audience, and that's why this intercultural dialogue or non-violent communication should be horizontal as well as vertical. What I mean by that? Horizontal means at one platform there should be dialogue between the races, between the castes, between the classes, between the communities, between the different. Vertically, it should be at national level, at regional level, at international level. So what is we are doing here? See, when in this Gandhi Smriti and Darshan Samiti, what it is doing, and UNESCO has already established that Mahatma Gandhi Institute at New Delhi. So that is collaboration and partnership. The COVID-19 is a global virus, and hate speech is also a global virus. We can deal it with collaboration and partnership only. And the UNESCO is doing many things. But Mother Gandhi Samriti and Darshan Samriti is doing, Vedvyas Kundu has already told. But because I have been associated with the UNESCO since last 15 years, I see at international level, we have media and information literacy promoting it as a strategy. And we had published a UNESCO Melody Yearbook in 2015 that was media and information literacy for reinforcing human rights and countering this violence and extremism. That Elton is showing. Then UNESCO has this mail toolkit where there are media and information literacy policy and strategy guidelines. Then we have media and information literacy curriculum for teachers, media and information literacy indicators, media and information literacy framework, and then there have been 12 the capacity building workshops training the teachers, as well as I organized a media and information literacy capacity building workshop for youth and youth-led organizations. And similarly, there is annual conference by UNESCO, that is Media and Information Literacy Week feature conference, and there the focus is also on the Youth Agenda Forum. And I want to share happily with you that a few days back, somebody from here went to United Nations and we brought the concept of that MUN, that is Model United Nations, and we organized that event for 2 days. And now the youth is two events, one at Punjabi University, Media and Information Literacy Capacity Building Workshop, and the other one I am saying Model United Nations, where people were surrogating. First, they were surrogating out different countries. The representatives were saying that somebody was representing Belgium, other was USA, and another person was representing China, and they were putting their points of view. And that way, their soft skills were being developed, debating, diplomacy, team spirit, leadership skills. Similarly, similarly, on the second day, there was a all India political party meeting. It means the people were assigned the role of different political parties, and there they were having discussion. The young people were having discussion, pro and like this. So what I am saying, that conflict and hate speech, intolerance, and this non-violence, violence, and this othering, this has no place in democratic societies. And if we want to have sustainable development, then we will have to promote media and information literacy skills, and where we are talking of critical thinking skills, independent learning, people should be able to decode the truth, because media stories are mainstream media is controlled by this governments, politicians, corporate tycoons, and now some NGOs are also making it a business. I've seen it in the COVID-19. What is happening there? So the hope is from the alternative media. I'll share with you many of the sites of alternative media where you can find truthful stories. So we are not interested in this misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation. We are interested in the truth. So truth, and Guru Nanak has said that truth is fine, but more important is truthful living. There should not be any gap between the rhetoric and reality, that politicians are saying something and doing something else. Country leaders are saying something and doing something else. There is a gap between. So truth is okay. Media should bring the truth before the people. Truthful stories. But truthful living is more important. And dialogue is the only way to promote peace, harmony, and sustainable development. And we are planning. Here we were talking of young people, students, youth. More focus was on education, research, training, and practice. So practice and training is very important. See, when we are talking of skills, speaking skills, listening skills, writing skills, reading skills. These are important, but we must know what to speak, what to read, what to write. And our listening skills perhaps are very poor. And if when I see the panel discussion on the TV, people are very intolerant. They are not ready to digest what the other is saying. So we must have respect for difference of opinion. So I can conclude it like this, that there should be no discrimination, there should be no discretion, there should be no this othering, and non-violent communication. That is the concept of Mahatma Gandhi, and similarly intercultural dialogue, which Millard Unitwin is doing. That is the research arm of Mill Alliance. So that is the same thing. And I tell you, somebody has written that Guru Nanak Dev and Mahatma Buddha spoke a lot, but they did not speak anything. That's a paradoxical situation. As Elton was saying, that the person who was talking of non-violent communication was assassinated, and Martin Luther Jr. So we are saying, and we are intolerant. So you can kill a person, but you cannot kill the views. You cannot kill the perspective. It's a relay race. If one person is killed, other person will take the lead. So this will go on sanitize. So if COVID-19 is a virus, hate speech is also a virus. So hate speech, the conflict is there, resolution is with this small dialogue only. So dialogue, you may have conflict, you may have wars, you may have it at your family level, at work, at country level, at global level. Ultimately, you have to come and across the table for dialogue. That is intercultural dialogue. And there were World War I, World War II, and then came UNESCO, World Health Organization, like that. But that information which is coming from these sources, we should have the skills for critical thinking and evaluation skills. And media and information literacy can teach you only how to take the bull of hate speech by horns. That can be taught by media and information literacy skills only. But before I close, I would like to thank all the experts, all the speakers, Dr. Alton Grizzle, Brahm has already left, Matthew Johnson, Sarah, Maha, everybody was cooperated with us. And I think it would have been a great the learning experience for the participants as well. And think many questions might have come in the chat, and you can see that we will also try to prepare a report of this event and try to share it with UNESCO, so that, and we have also recorded everything, and we will share the recording also, so that the people who could not join because of any reason, he is not left behind. He should also have this benefit of this panel discussion. Once again, I'm very grateful, very grateful. I can't find words to thank you all the experts, because of their time variation. There is I think, must be around quarter to 12 in Bangkok, and to see in New York and this Ottawa, the time is in it may be now around 11, 12 p.m. daytime. So, but the technology has this benefit, it has given a death blow to the traditional constraints of space and time. There are no constraints of space and time, and anyone is connected anywhere, anytime. We can have real-time access, and we can have timely access to information. But need is for critical thinking and evaluation skills, and that will come from the media and information literacy, as well as horizontal and vertical collaboration and partnership. Thank you very much. Thank you. So kind of you.